it? Absolutely not. I started with that. There are no segregated bathrooms in Israel. There are no segregated restaurants. But there is segregated education. But that's not even the case. That's not the most important. There is a segregated system of education. There's one for Jewish citizens, there's one for non-Jewish citizens. Absolutely true.
My mother is an elementary school teacher, and 1/3 of her percent are Palestinian Muslim students.
Ask the question.
But he's saying a lie, and I'm saying a fact.
Excuse me, if you're going to get into ad hominem attacks, I'm not answering your question. Next question. Next question. Yes. I can't accept ad hominem attacks. You made an argument. I was.
But I'm just saying, in Herzliya, my mother has.
Please check your facts.
30% of her students are Palestinian Muslim children.
You have your chance.
Ask your question, then let him move on.
Okay? Go ahead.
Thank you.
So you presented a lot of different tactics on how to, create campuses.
If you can speak up, please. It's very loud here.
Okay, so you've talked about a lot of different ways that organizations can, boycott divestitation. What tactic do you think is the best one to actually start getting a grassroots awareness about what's happening in Palestine? What do you think is the best thing that would probably get the most people to know about it?
Okay, I think BDS campaigns are the best to raise awareness. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Before the BDS movement started, raising awareness was extremely more difficult. We had to go through a lot of rallies and demonstrations and distributing this and distributing that, and it dissipates very quickly as much as it comes together quickly. Through BDS campaigns, it's sustained, it's gradual, and it's context sensitive. In other words, if, let's say, UC Irvine, you're working towards divestment. So you're taking the South African model, which we adopted in several US campuses. I went to Columbia University, and that's what we did at Columbia. We struggled for years until we convinced, we pressured Columbia University to divest. It took a lot of struggle, a lot of networking, a lot of building alliances, and so on. If that's your strategy, you want to convince UC Irvine to divest, let's say. And you start working on that in a strategic way. You've got to raise awareness in order to get to that end. So that's the most effective way to raise awareness, because but there's an end that you're working towards. So people are all working towards that end. It's much easier to spread education, to have panel discussions and so on, as long as there's a goal. Plus, when there's something like a divestment campaign on campus, usually there are debates. There's another side that opposes divestment, and debates are healthy. In any academic institution, we should encourage debates, so long as they're civil. So once there's debate, there's media, there's coverage, there's discussion, there's awareness. If it's very bland and you're just doing something very soft and nice that no one discusses, that's not going to raise awareness. Once you start working towards something really effective, and there's a lot of debate about it, then it gets coverage. For example, this coming Thursday, Professor Judith Butler and I are sharing a panel at Brooklyn College. I'm sure some of you have heard. You've heard because it was on NBC, CBS, ABC TV, on every single major newspaper, New York Times, every major paper in the New York area. It was very widely covered because we were attacked viciously by fanatic right-wing politicians in New York that attacked Brooklyn College, that attacked the president of Brooklyn College, that are trying to scuttle academic freedom. So working towards a goal raises awareness, so long as we stick to our principles, our ethical principles of human rights and international law, and never accept racists and never accept racism within our ranks. Next question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Say that tomorrow the PA and Israel or the Israeli government sign a peace agreement, and one of the and they agree on all major issues. I just came from a very interesting presentation by Gershon Baskin, which I'm sure you know. He just spoke not far from here, and he talked about 7 core issues. I'm not gonna waste your time too much. Say that tomorrow they come to an agreement, both governments, and they agree on most of the seven core, all of the 7 core issues, but the BDS movement does not agree, for example, on the type of right of return that they agree on. What would come of the BDS movement?
Okay, it's important because we defined ourselves, and we continue to define ourselves as a rights-based movement anchored in international law and universal principles of human rights. Any political convenient program reached through A and B that does not address our rights under international law will never be sufficient. Will never be sufficient. So let's say, before I continue, The right of return, particularly the right of return, is an individual as well as a collective right. So let's say you're the elected representative of the state of Palestine, and you go and negotiate, and you say, I'm giving up Omar Barghouti's right to return, in return for something else that you get as the representative, elected representative of the Palestinian people. Assume, we don't have any elected representatives, but assume you are democratically elected. You cannot give up my right of return. You cannot negotiate it away. This is my right. It's an individual as well as a collective right. No one can negotiate it away, not even an elected representative of the Palestinian people. That's what international law says. Every single refugee has a right to say, I will or I will not return. I want to exercise my right or I don't want to exercise my right. That's an individual decision. So assuming a peace agreement is reached between the PA, which is unelected, we don't have any democratically elected Palestinian leadership today, unfortunately. All our leadership has expired. The last democratic mandate was years ago. So, but that's another internal issue that Palestinians have to work on, get a democratic leadership elected. But assuming we get that, they cannot negotiate away our inalienable rights, nor our individual rights under international law. This is simple. So, as long as the agreement does not respect and conform to international law, does not respect our individual rights, we shall continue struggling and doing BDS across the world until we reach our basic rights. As I said, we don't care what the political solution is. We care about our basic rights. Yes?
We found in the United States that people have been more easily brainwashed to believe Israel's right to defend itself, and these arguments that have come out in this inherently obvious occupation of the Palestinian people. So how do you suggest appealing to an audience that is not appealing to much logic right now?
Okay, I think many people, if I understood your question correctly, many people bring this point together with the point of violence. Who started the violence? He did this violence, rockets, not rockets. You know, the violence issue usually comes up with the self-defense argument. So let's take it to the extreme. That's the most extreme argument that we hear, that Israel is suffering from violence and has to respond. As a peace activist, as a human rights activist who wants to achieve peace based on justice, I must be against all violence. I want to see an end to all bloodshed. I don't want anyone killed of any side. But to get there, let's be honest, you can't end violence without ending the root cause of violence, and that's occupation and oppression. It never happened in history that you ended violence without addressing the root cause of violence. As Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator that I'm very inspired by, once said, with the start of oppression, violence has already started. In a master-slave relationship, the master does not have to beat up the slave every day to be violent. Just having a slavery relationship is violent. Having an occupation is violent. And there's a resistance that may be violent. So to end all this action by the occupier and the oppressor, and reaction by the occupied and the oppressed, end the root cause of violence, the occupation, the apartheid system, the oppression, and then we won't have any violence. That's the lesson we learned in South Africa. That's the lesson we learned in Ireland. That's the lesson we learned in many other places, where you end the root cause of violence and you end the violent confrontation between various communities. Another point to add to that, which adds to the anti-Semitism issue. A lot of times in the US, perhaps much more than any of the Western countries I've toured and spoken at, usually some people say, oh, but Jews and Arabs hate each other. You can't, they will continue fighting and killing each other and so on. That's a bit racist and a bit reductionist. Racist because it assumes that Jews and Arabs are inherently somehow mad. We both have some genetic disorder and continue killing each other, which is very ahistoric. And second, it's so Western. It's so European, this concept. We never had pogroms in the Arab East. We never had a Holocaust in the Arab East. We never had massacres against Jewish Arabs in the Arab East. That's not something that we have in our culture. We don't have inherent hatred between Arab and Jew in the Arab East. This is a very European concept. It's a very modern concept that came to the Arab world from Europe, where there were always pogroms and massacres against Jews, culminating in the Holocaust, the huge genocide of World War II. So let's not accept easily the concept that, oh, they'll continue fighting each other and killing each other and so on. No. We never had that. We can't coexist in peace and justice. We don't hate each other inherently. We hate injustice. Yes, sir.
Was there not an expulsion of Jews from Arab lands in 1948?
Expulsion? Perhaps. Let's be a bit accurate. If you read the record straight, Jews in Iraq are different than Egypt, are different than Morocco, and so on. Predominantly, according to the latest research, predominantly Jews of Arab origin left Arab states when the State of Israel was created. A lot of it had to do with Israeli propaganda. A lot of it, in the case of Iraq and Egypt, had to do with Mossad violent operations against Jews.
Are you suggesting they left voluntarily?
In many cases, but not voluntarily altogether. In Iraq, for example, and this is proven, you can read Ella Shohat, the Jewish, previously Israeli, now American academic at NYU, who proved how the Iraqi Jews were pressured into leaving Iraq. This is very well documented now in academic record. Attacks on Jewish synagogues in Iraq, leading to massive conflict and massive controversy, leading to anti-Jewish feelings in Iraq, leading to mass exodus of Iraqi Jews out of Iraq. So there are many elements. It's much more complex. But regardless, let's assume. So your premise is not exactly accurate. In some cases, yes. In many cases, no. Assume your premise is correct. Assume Arab states expelled Jews as a response to Israel's expulsion of Palestinians, the indigenous Palestinians, 800,000 indigenous Palestinians, during the Nakba of 1948, assuming that's the case. Do they have a right? Absolutely not. Arab states do not have a right, cannot be justified in expelling anyone. As a human rights activist, I will defend the rights of every single person who is denied their rights. If there's a Jewish refugee from Egypt, from Morocco, who was expelled from Egypt or Morocco, whose property was pillaged, was stolen in Egypt or Morocco, I would defend her right to return and her right to reclaim her property, just as I would any Palestinian refugee.
Expand your movement to include all of the Jews who were forced out of those lands.
That's not our mandate.
A right to return for refugees,
no,
wherever they may be.
No, that's not our mandate. You can't do everything. We're focused on Palestinian rights under international law. We're a Palestinian movement. There are groups that address other rights. We work with them. We support the indigenous people of this country, the Native Americans' rights. But do we adopt that in the BDS movement? No, but we support their struggles. So we can stand with other struggles across the world without including it in your program and making your program impossible to implement.
So you can see.
Let's not have a back and forth to give others a chance. I'm sorry.
Sir, just one quick question. I want to clarify, please. So your movement is a Palestinian movement?
No, it's a global movement led by Palestinians.
Okay, all right. So let me just ask, if I could, as a quick question. If you achieve your end, shall we say, is there a next target? Is there a next area that you would like to take your movement? Is it another country, another area you want to take?
No, it's a Palestinian-initiated movement that has become a global movement, but based on Palestinian rights. Once Palestinian rights are achieved, that's the end of the movement. There's no reason for it to exist.
That's it, really? That's
yes.
The clear end of the movement?
Exactly. Now, there might be other movements springing around that support other rights. As I said, we conceive ourselves, we perceive our movement as part of a global movement for social justice, for dignity, for human rights. So, if, assuming we achieve our goals, ending the occupation, ending apartheid, and the right of return, that's the end of the BDS movement. It no longer needs, its raison d'etre ends, does not exist. But as activists, of course we will support, we will continue to support, as we do now, other progressive movements across the world. When I went to school at Columbia, I was part of the anti-apartheid movement there, the South African anti-apartheid movement. And I was an engineer. Okay, no one is perfect. And my colleagues in the School of Engineering would ask me, engineers mostly are not very politicized, so they don't demonstrate and hold placards, and so they go to the lab. So when my fellow engineers would see me holding a placard, abolish apartheid, one of them came to me and said, do you really think that apartheid in South Africa will be abolished in your lifetime? Don't you have anything better to do? So I said, perhaps not. I mean, I'm not that optimistic that it will be abolished in my lifetime, but who cares? I'm doing it out of a moral obligation. So he said, but you're Palestinian, don't you have enough to worry about? I said, yeah, but the struggle in South Africa is also connected to me. If they win, I win. And indeed, when they won freedom, when they abolished apartheid, we won. We saw that as a victory, not just for us, for every conscientious person around the world. So yes, movements are connected, and if the BDS movement achieves its goals, we'll find other human rights goals to work with as individuals.
It's 8:30 right now, so we'll be taking 2 more questions.
Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about, like, kind of compare the divestment movement in South Africa with the one that's going on in Palestine, and like what stage we're in right now, and how optimistic you are? I know, like, I've seen myself, so much progress has been made these last couple of years, and your presentation showed that, and really there's a lot to be optimistic about. But I kind of want to hear what stage do you feel we're in, and like how much more to go and things like that.
Okay. I'm glad you're asking this, because many who were active or who read even about the South African anti-apartheid movement usually tell us in the Palestinian BDS movement, it's been 7 years, and you still do not have one US campus outside of Hampshire College that has divested. You don't have one major church that has adopted BDS in full. Perhaps the Presbyterians and Methodists adopted parts of BDS, but not the full BDS movement. So what gives you any hope to continue? But those who ask this are forgetting that the South African boycott started in the 1950s. The ANC called for a boycott of South African apartheid in the 1950s. When did it start having an impact and reaching the mainstream? In the 80s. In the 80s. Late 70s, early 80s. It took 25 to 30 years for our South African brothers and sisters to achieve mainstreaming of their anti-apartheid boycott, divestment, and sanctions. A very long time. In comparison, we're going much faster. Much, much, much faster. Part of that is connected to social media. Now that we have the internet, blogs, communication is much easier. UC Irvine passes a resolution. The next day, some university in New Zealand is inspired by it and tries to pass a resolution similar to it. In the South African case, we had to wait for some clandestine facts to reach us from some basement in South Africa on what's going on. And imagine what it takes to get any communication going. I'll just give you an anecdote. I was once touring with Ronnie Kasrils, a former minister in the Mandela government, who happens to be Jewish. He's one of the people who started Not in Our Name movement in South Africa, progressive Jews in South Africa saying Not in Our Name. Ronnie Kasrils and I were touring in the UK, various campuses and so on. And once we were going to Scotland, long train ride, and Ronnie says, you know, Omar, I'll share with you one experience that we had. Perhaps you can emulate it in the occupied territories. And I said, yes, what is that? He said, in Johannesburg, we used to have bunches of leaflets against apartheid and put some fireworks, and we light the fireworks, and it explodes, and the leaflets are all over the place. And it makes such a sound that everyone jumps to get a leaflet. So it attracts a lot of attention. And I told him, Ronnie, now we have email. So I think, I mean, I don't want to reduce it to the internet, but the internet certainly helped a lot. So what stage are we at? I don't think we can quantify it very easily, but certainly we're making much, much faster progress than we thought possible when we started BDS 7 years ago. None of us, and I'm one of the most optimistic, thought after 7 years we'll be here. We'll have a UC Irvine student government passing BDS resolution unanimously. We never thought Hampshire College would divest in 2009. We never thought Judith Butler, Alice Walker, all those major cultural and academic figures would endorse and advocate for BDS. So we're going much faster, and I think it's spreading much faster because it's a very compelling movement. It's a very morally compelling movement based on human rights and international law. Yes?
One more question.
Where's the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people?
It's not a question for me to answer. What's the ancestral? There are many books, a lot of research. Some, like Shlomo Sand, a Jewish Israeli professor, says that there is no Jewish people as such. There are several components. There are Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, who he says came from European origins, specifically East European origins. He claims they're Christian, who converted to Judaism. Certain tribes in that Central Asia and Eastern Europe that converted to Judaism, whereas Arab Jews, Jews of Arab origin, have always been in the region, in the Arab region, have always been part of that. So there isn't one origin of a Jewish nation as such. There's a lot of research. Ashkenazi versus Sephardic, Mizrahi, many differences. Forgetting the research and academic research and the disagreement.